Ever seen someone treated unfairly, while everyone around them just stood by? It's a gut-wrenching moment, filled with a sense of helplessness. What would you do? Would you step in or turn away? Today, we're diving into a story of courage, second chances, and doing what's right, especially when no one else is watching. Where are you watching from? Share in the comments below, and be sure to hit subscribe for more inspiring stories like this. Welcome to Motivation for Success, where we share stories that inspire you to take action and make a difference. Don't forget to post your thoughts and let's dive into the rest of the story. Jonah Rivers slowly made his way through the bustling portico of Harborfield International Airport, his cane tapping lightly against the polished floor. He wore a faded jacket emblazoned with insignia from a bygone era, a testament to the years he served in the military. Though his posture was a bit stooped, there was a dignified quality about him, an unspoken resilience, as though nothing in this world could bend his spirit completely. Jonah was on his way to Seaview City, where a small ceremony was planned to honor the survivors of his old squadron. Each year, the number of attendees became fewer. Yet, Jonah felt it was important to go, to pay tribute to those who had stood beside him when life or death had been a split-second difference. He arrived at Gate 27, ticket in hand. The overhead sign read, Harborfield Seaview City Flight 939. The line was already thinning, most travelers having already boarded. Jonah eased toward the attendant desk, where a young woman named Lauren Parks was scanning tickets and passports. When Jonah handed her his boarding pass, Lauren's face took on a slight frown. "Good afternoon, sir," she said, glancing at the pass. Seat 16B. Let me check something quickly." She typed into the computer, brows furrowed. Jonah could see from the reflection in the screen that something was amiss. After a few moments, Lauren's polite smile resurfaced, but there was a forced quality to it. "I'm sorry, Mr. Rivers, but this ticket seems to be invalid for today's flight," she announced, keeping her voice low. "We might have overbooked." Jonah blinked, not quite understanding. "I purchased it weeks ago," he replied. "And I'm expected in Seaview City." "Yes, I see that you have a confirmation code," Lauren said quietly. "But the system shows the seat was reassigned." Jonah drew in a breath. He'd heard stories about airlines overbooking. It happened sometimes. Yet, he'd never personally been forced off a plane. "All right," he said, stepping aside. "Could you let me know what I should do?" "Please wait here," Lauren replied, her tone edging between impatience and an attempt at courtesy. Watching from a short distance away was Martin Harris, dressed in casual jeans and a simple hooded sweatshirt. At a quick glance, he looked like any other passenger waiting for his boarding group to be called. What most people didn't know was that Martin was actually the owner of Harris Airways, the airline operating Flight 939. Martin had chosen to travel incognito, blending in with the crowd to observe how passengers were treated on an average day. He often did this to ensure that company values, respect, empathy, and efficiency, were not merely mission statement words but alive in practice. Shook her head. "Look, I understand it's unfortunate, but the seats are all taken. Once the flight is closed, it's closed." Jonah patted Martin's hand gently. "Thank you," he murmured, "but I don't want to cause trouble." Yet Martin persisted. "I don't believe pointing out someone's rights is causing trouble," he said. Then, turning back to Lauren, he added, "Doesn't the airline's policy state that you should offer compensation and ask for volunteers before removing someone who already has a valid ticket?" Lauren's demeanor became defensive. "Sir, we followed standard procedure. We can't just remove another paying customer to accommodate him." Martin studied her for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I have a feeling that standard procedure could be handled differently." He looked around. "The plane hasn't even pushed back yet, has it? Maybe you could ask if someone would be willing to take a different flight in exchange for a voucher." Lauren's lips compressed into a firm line. "We're past the boarding cutoff. The flight is departing now." With that, she turned away, effectively ending the discussion. Martin glanced at Jonah, noticing the older man's trembling posture. It wasn't just physical fatigue, he realized, this was emotional strain, too. Martin suggested they go sit down while the flight departed. They found chairs near a large window looking out onto the tarmac. Jonah sank into his seat, setting the cane against his leg. Martin could see the reflection of the plane in the older man's downcast eyes. "So," Martin said gently, "that ceremony you mentioned, some kind of reunion?" Jonah nodded. "Yes, a gathering for the men who served in my unit overseas. They're giving us a small honor, and, well, time is short for many of us." Martin felt a pang in his chest. "You served in the army?" "Indeed. Many years ago." "Hard to believe now, looking at me," Jonah said with a half-smile. "But I was a young kid once, thinking I could change the world." Martin hesitated, then asked, "May I know your full name?" Jonah gave a slight shrug. "Jonah Rivers. I'm nobody special. I just happened to serve at a time when duty called." Something about that name tickled a memory in Martin's mind, but he couldn't quite place it. He resolved to figure it out. "Well, Mr. Rivers, I'm sorry about the fiasco. Is there any chance you can still make the ceremony?" Jonah looked at his watch. "If I found another way to Seaview City that arrives by tomorrow morning, I might just make it." Martin frowned, formulating a plan. "I might be able to help. First, let me see if I can talk with someone from the airline." Jonah raised an eyebrow. "Why would they listen to you any more than they did just now?" Martin offered a small smile. "Let's just say I have a vested interest in how they handle these situations." Leaving Jonah to rest, Martin stepped away and made a phone call to the airline's corporate office. He didn't drop his full credentials to the receptionist, he simply stated that he needed to speak with a senior manager about a passenger rights issue. Although it took a few transfers, Martin eventually connected with an executive named Avery Hill, who recognized Martin's voice immediately. "Mr. Harris," Avery exclaimed. "Is everything all right? You rarely call me during business trips." "It's not all right, actually," Martin said, keeping his tone level. "I'm at Harborfield International, and one of your gate attendants just bumped an elderly veteran off Flight 939. Avery sighed audibly. "I see. We do have an overbooking situation, but they should have asked for volunteers." "Were you identified?" "No. I'm incognito. I want you to coordinate with me quietly. I'll handle it here, and we'll discuss disciplinary measures later." "Understood," Avery said. "How can I help you right now?" "I want you to arrange another flight or a direct route for him, even if we have to partner with another airline. If that's not possible, we'll hire a charter plane." Avery paused, presumably taking notes. "Yes, we can do that. Text me the passenger's details." Martin ended the call and walked back to Jonah, who was gazing through the window at the plane that was now taxiing away. "Let's get out of this terminal," Martin said gently. "I'll find us a more comfortable place to sort things out." They made their way to a nearby airport lounge, one typically reserved for first-class flyers, but Martin showed a special pass. Jonah marveled at the plush seating and quiet ambience. A quick phone call confirmed that the lounge attendant was expecting them, though she didn't look like she recognized Martin as the owner either. That was exactly how Martin preferred it. Jonah settled into a comfortable armchair, and Martin ordered 2 cups of coffee. A hush fell between them, a moment of shared solace in a hectic environment. Eventually, Jonah asked, "Son, are you sure you're not someone important? You're managing to open all sorts of doors for me." Martin chuckled. "I guess you could say I'm well connected. Let's leave it at that for the moment." Jonah accepted the answer, sipping his coffee. "I do appreciate this. I never expected such kindness from a stranger." Martin shrugged. "I'm not as much a stranger as you think. I have a suspicion I've heard your name before, Jonah Rivers." Did you serve in the 141st Reconnaissance Division? A flicker of surprise crossed Jonah's face. I did. That was a long time ago. Why do you ask? My grandfather was in the 141st, Martin admitted. Malcolm Harris. He used to talk about a soldier named Rivers who saved his life more than once. Jonah set his cup down, eyes widening. Malcolm Harris was your grandfather? I remember him. He was a brilliant radio operator, a calm presence even in the midst of chaos. Always had a joke up his sleeve, if memory serves. Martin felt a rush of warmth. That sounds like him. He passed away when I was a teenager, but the stories he told me about that division shaped my entire life. Jonah's gaze turned inward, as though he was revisiting those days. He was a good man, he said softly, and a brave one too. We went through some harrowing nights. Sometimes, the only reason we made it through was because he got those transmissions out in time. The lounge's gentle hum enveloped them, and for a moment, the hustle of travel seemed miles away. Martin couldn't shake the sense of destiny that seemed to hang over the encounter. Of all the veterans in the world, to meet the very man his grandfather had so often spoken about, it felt like a sign that he had to do more than just secure a flight for Jonah. He had to make sure Jonah understood his worth, even in his twilight years. Before Martin could dwell further on the coincidence, his phone buzzed. It was Avery, calling back with information. Martin answered quietly, stepping aside to maintain some privacy. Mr. Harris, Avery said, I managed to find a seat on an evening flight to Seaview City on another carrier. Leaves around 8. It'll get Mr. Rivers in by midnight local time. Martin glanced at Jonah from across the lounge. That should work. He's just got to make it there in time for a morning ceremony. Yes, and I've arranged for a hotel room near the airport. We'll cover the cost, Avery continued. But there's one more thing you should know, the gate attendant, Lauren Parks, is new, but her direct supervisor apparently approved the overbooking strategy. Do you want to address that now? Martin exhaled. I'll deal with it later. For now, just confirm Jonah's new ticket. I want him to have the same seat class he originally purchased, or better. Understood, sir. Martin ended the call, then turned to Jonah with a grin. Good news. There's an evening flight that'll get you into Seaview City tonight. We'll also put you up in a nice hotel close by so you can rest before your event. Jonah smiled in relief, though a trace of doubt lingered in his eyes. That's generous. Are you sure I'm not imposing? You're not, Martin assured him. Trust me. I owe a debt of gratitude to you and the entire 141st Reconnaissance Division. Jonah chuckled softly. Your grandfather never seemed like he wanted anyone to owe him anything. He just did his job. Martin nodded. Well, maybe it's my turn to do mine. By mid-afternoon, Jonah's new travel details were confirmed. He had several hours until the flight, so Martin offered to accompany him for a meal. They found a quiet restaurant inside the airport, ordered sandwiches, and continued talking. Jonah recounted a few anecdotes from the war, light-hearted stories about improvised solutions and comedic mishaps. Martin listened intently, occasionally chiming in with recollections of what his grandfather had shared about the same missions. They laughed, forging a connection that transcended age. When the conversation lulled, Martin changed the subject to the airline. Jonah, earlier, you were treated poorly by that gate agent. I want you to know it's not typical. My company, he paused, catching himself. Well, the airline I'm loyal to, prides itself on customer service. Jonah shrugged. People make mistakes. It's not my first run-in with airline confusion. I usually let these things slide. Martin tapped his fingers on the table, a habit he'd had since childhood. But you shouldn't have to let it slide. You served your country, and at this stage in life, you deserve respect. Jonah looked away, perhaps embarrassed. I never asked for special treatment. I just wanted to get on my flight. Martin nodded. That's exactly it. You weren't asking for anything out of the ordinary. Sometimes, we forget that basic courtesy isn't a favor, it's a right. Jonah took a sip of water. I appreciate your concern, truly. Back near gate 27, the next set of departures were starting to line up. Martin and Jonah stood to the side, waiting to see if there was any update about Jonah's transfer of luggage to the new flight. That was when Lauren reappeared, looking agitated. She spotted Jonah and Martin immediately. Lauren approached, her expression hovering between annoyance and forced politeness. Mr. Rivers, I understand you've been rebooked. I just wanted to finalize the paperwork. Her gaze flicked over to Martin, suspicious. And you, sir? Did you manage to get another flight as well? Martin offered a tight smile. I'm going to stay with Mr. Rivers until he boards. I think it's the least I can do, given the circumstances. Lauren looked uneasy, fiddling with her company badge. Yes, well, we do apologize for any inconvenience. It was an unavoidable situation. Jonah gave a polite nod but remained silent. Martin decided it was time for a controlled reveal, hoping it might instill some humility in how Lauren dealt with passengers in the future. You might want to inform your supervisor, he said calmly, that Martin Harris is aware of the situation. Lauren frowned. Martin Harris? That name sounds, wait, are you? He nodded once. I'm the majority owner of Harris Airways. The airline you represent. For a moment, Lauren looked as though her legs might give way. She stammered, I had no idea. I'm sorry. Jonah, looking concerned, touched her arm lightly with paternal kindness. Miss, no one's going to bite your head off. Don't worry. Lauren swallowed hard. I really didn't recognize you, Mr. Harris. If I had known, she trailed off, uncertain of what to say next. Martin's tone was even but firm. It shouldn't matter whether you recognize me or not. Every passenger deserves to be treated with decency. Especially a veteran who's given so much. Lauren's eyes glistened. I understand. I was under pressure because the flight was overbooked, and my supervisor insisted we seal the door quickly. I'm sorry for any disrespect. Jonah offered a gentle smile. Apology accepted. It's all behind us now. Martin nodded, taking a step back. Just remember, compassion doesn't cost you anything. A few minutes of your time can make all the difference. Lauren thanked them both, then hurried off, presumably to inform her superiors about the encounter. Jonah exhaled, his shoulders relaxing now that the tension had ebbed. You handled that well, Jonah told Martin. I might have lost my temper if I were your age. Martin smirked. Sometimes it's best to keep calm. Then people don't know what you're planning next. When the time came for Jonah to board his new flight, Martin insisted on accompanying him to the gate. This time, the agent on duty, Tomas Reed, greeted Jonah warmly, having clearly received instructions from higher-ups. Not only did Jonah have a confirmed seat, but the airline also upgraded him to first class. Tomas shook Jonah's hand. Thank you for your service, sir. We hope you enjoy a comfortable flight. Jonah murmured his gratitude, though Martin could see the hint of surprise on Jonah's face. The sudden shift from being ignored to receiving VIP treatment was stark. Martin gave Jonah a final handshake. I'll be in Seaview City on business soon. I'd like to catch up with you if that's all right. That would be wonderful, Jonah replied, a sincerity in his voice. Anne. Martin, thank you again. Safe travels, Martin said. He stepped back and watched as Jonah disappeared down the boarding ramp, cane lightly tapping. As the doors closed, Martin found himself unexpectedly emotional. It struck him how close Jonah had come to missing a ceremony honoring those who put their lives on the line for their country. One small oversight could have robbed an old soldier of a meaningful moment with his comrades. That evening, Martin returned to his office, a modest but well-appointed space near the top floor of the Harris Airways corporate building. He reviewed a stack of documents, reports on passenger satisfaction, incidents of overbooking, and the company's policies regarding special accommodations. It became clear that while the airline had procedures, those guidelines weren't always followed diligently at the ground level. He called Avery Hill. "We need a new directive, effective immediately," Martin said. "Something that ensures veterans and seniors are never brushed aside in an overbooking situation." Avery, who had grown used to Martin's swift decisions, replied confidently, "I'll draft a policy. Mandatory staff training, plus an internal hotline for gate agents to call before denying any passenger in a special category. We'll also add priority for veterans if there's an overbooking crisis." Martin tapped his desk. "Yes, but it can't just be words on a page. We need a culture shift. People need to see the faces behind the tickets." "Agreed. I'll propose a campaign to highlight stories of veterans who have flown with us. We can do interviews, maybe short video clips, to foster empathy among our employees." Martin nodded, even though Avery couldn't see him. "That's perfect. And when Jonah Rivers is willing, I'd like him to be involved. He's a powerful example of who we serve." Avery promised to get started immediately. Hanging up, Martin allowed himself a small smile. The morning's confrontation had been jarring, but perhaps it was just the nudge the airline needed to remember why they existed, to serve every person who stepped onto a plane. 2 weeks later, Jonah's reunion in Seaview City had come and gone, and the airline's new initiative was in full swing. Martin had extended a formal invitation for Jonah to visit the corporate office, offering to fly him out on a day trip if he felt up to it. He wanted to show Jonah that the lessons learned from their encounter weren't just cosmetic changes but something deeper. Jonah accepted. One crisp Tuesday morning, Martin waited in the foyer of the Harris Airways headquarters. When Jonah stepped through the glass doors, wearing the same well-worn jacket, Martin felt a sense of pride. The older man's presence commanded quiet respect. Some employees paused, likely recognizing him from internal memos and the new Veterans First training. A brief meeting with the management team followed. Avery Hill presented the updated policy guidelines, and Jonah sat quietly, listening. At the end, Avery asked if Jonah had any comments or suggestions. Jonah looked around the room, at the polished conference table, the earnest faces of department heads. "All I ever wanted," he said softly, "was to be treated like everyone else. I don't want anyone to put me on a pedestal. But I can tell you, it breaks my heart to see how some older folks or disabled veterans get overlooked. I thank you for what you're doing. It'll mean a lot to people out there who might not have a voice." A round of applause filled the room. A few staff members dabbed at their eyes. Though the changes might seem like standard corporate reforms to an outsider, everyone present knew that these shifts reflected the airline's genuine commitment to empathy and respect. After the meeting, Martin led Jonah down a corridor lined with photographs, images of historical planes, scenes from the early days of flight, and eventually pictures of veterans traveling on Harris Airways over the years. The final frame was newly installed, a photograph of Jonah by the gate in Seaview City, shaking hands with an airline representative. Underneath the photo, a small plaque read, "In honor of all who serve and have served. Thank you for your sacrifice." Jonah paused, reading the inscription. "You didn't have to do all this," he whispered. Martin turned to him. "Yes, we did. We want your story, and the stories of so many others, to remind us why we're in business, to connect people, not just transport them." They exited onto the tarmac, where a sleek jet waited for a short demonstration flight. A large decal on the aircraft depicted two hands clasped in a handshake, one wearing a military dog tag. Above it, bold letters read, "Honor in Flight." Jonah's eyes widened, and Martin explained, "We're dedicating this plane to all veterans. Inside, there's a small plaque with your name, and the names of a few others who've helped shape this new vision." Overwhelmed, Jonah ran a hand over the metal exterior. He could almost see his reflection, older and grayer but still standing tall. "This is, well, it's more than I ever dreamed of." Martin smiled, placing a gentle hand on Jonah's shoulder. "You never asked for it. That's what makes it all the more deserved." With the new policies in place, flight attendants, gate agents, and ground crew across the network began greeting veterans and seniors with extra care. Passengers who once felt invisible noticed the difference. Complaints about rude treatment dropped significantly, replaced by letters of gratitude. Martin arranged to meet Jonah one more time at Harborfield International Airport, the very place where they first crossed paths. This time, Jonah wasn't struggling to stand in line, he had a priority boarding pass, courtesy of the new system. Lauren Parks, the gate agent who had once turned Jonah away, now greeted him by name with a warm smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Rivers," she said, her tone genuine. "How are you today?" Jonah's smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I'm doing just fine, Ms. Parks. It's good to see you again." Lauren nodded. "Likewise. I'm truly glad you're here." She offered a slight bow of respect. Martin, standing a few steps away, observed the scene with quiet satisfaction. He stepped forward, placing a hand on Lauren's shoulder. "Thank you for your kindness," he told her. Their eyes met, and she gave a nod, no more words were needed. Turning to Jonah, Martin said, "Ready to fly, sir?" Jonah chuckled, adjusting the strap of his carry-on. "I believe I am. Thanks to you, I feel like I'm walking on a red carpet every time." Martin shook his head. "You're just getting the treatment you've always deserved. Safe travels, Jonah. We'll meet again soon." Before stepping onto the plane, Jonah turned to face Martin. "You know," he said, tapping the tip of his cane lightly against the floor, "you remind me of your grandfather. The best qualities live on." Martin felt a lump in his throat. "Thank you. That means more than you could ever know." And with that, Jonah Rivers boarded the aircraft, walking confidently to his seat. This time, there was no confusion, no exclusion, just a quiet welcome for a man who had served and sacrificed. Sometimes, a single encounter can spark changes that ripple far beyond two people. Martin Harris and Jonah Rivers never planned to meet, yet their brief experience revealed a gap in empathy and respect that many travelers face, veterans especially. The solution wasn't just a new set of rules but a new approach, acknowledging every passenger's humanity. Now, a question for you: have you ever seen someone overlooked or disrespected, and did you step in, or did you stay silent? Share your thoughts below. Every story we tell here is a reminder that change can start with just one person speaking up. And if this story resonated with you, if you believe in a world where respect and kindness guide our actions, please hit that subscribe button. We share stories designed to inspire compassion and remind each of us that how we treat one another matters deeply. If this story moved you, consider spreading kindness today. Sometimes, a few words of support or a small gesture can create a monumental impact in someone else's life. Whether it's holding a door open, offering your seat to an elderly passenger, or simply speaking a kind word, every act counts. Because while policies and systems are important, nothing replaces genuine human empathy.